Why aren't more movies being shot on mirrorless cameras? Obviously, they're capable. Some movies have been, and they look great. These cameras are now having great dynamic range. Some can shoot 6K and 8K RAW. We have open gate now. So why aren't more movies being shot on mirrorless cameras? Let's start off with some movies that have used mirrorless cameras before. Obviously, and very notably, is The Creator. It's probably the highest budget movie ever to be shot primarily with a mirrorless camera. Almost 90% of its shots were on the Sony FX3. The movie ended up looking great. Unfortunately, it didn't do that great. While it's regarded as a fantastically well put together movie, on the video space on YouTube, that's not what the box office shows. In fact, they only made $104 million with an $80 million budget. And to most people, this sounds great. This sounds like a profit. It's really not. Movies really aren't profitable until they hit about twice the amount of money to their budget. And you might be thinking, oh yeah, well, Disney keeps throwing movies that are barely even hitting their budget. That's because they're selling merch off of it. They're making their money off of merch. A movie like The Creator doesn't really do that. It kind of has to make most of its money off of the movie itself. They did not hit $160 million. They were 56 million short. Therefore, the movie is considered a box office disaster. It failed masterfully. It is a lesson in what not to do when you're given a lot of money to make a movie. It failed miserably. It was not a success. Visually, sure, it was pretty good. But honestly, as a movie and a story, it failed absolutely horribly. So let's take a look at another film that was done well. Real quick insert before we move on. The original short film slash proof of concept for The Creator was shot on a Nikon Z9. The reason they chose to use the FX3 was because it was the smallest camera that had the most power that they could find at the time. That has since changed. There are more powerful cameras for the same weight and size now. One of my favorite movies to talk about when it comes to mirrorless cameras on large sets is The Possession of Hannah Grace, a horror short film made in 2018 that utilized the Sony a7S II. And yes, they decided to choose that camera, and it's not for any reasons you think. It has nothing to do with the camera quality. The camera shot 4K, which was a must at the time, and it shot in Sony log, which also was a must. It had decent dynamic range for what it was at the time. However, it only shot in 8-bit 4K, which most people would consider nowadays an absolute no-go for anything, which I think is stupid. I think 8-bit is fine as long as you know what you're doing on set with your lighting and your colors, but that's a whole nother video. Now, The Possession of Hannah Grace grossed $43 million in the box office while only costing $7.7 million to produce. That's almost 6 times its production value, which is absolutely insane. Horror films tend to do well, but this was especially well done, and it comes down to choosing that mirrorless camera. They wanted to shoot on some vintage Hawk 65 lenses, which if you don't know anything about Hawk lenses, they're personally my favorite. I think they look absolutely amazing. From what I can find, they're very, very expensive to rent. I couldn't find any real legitimate sources telling me how much they paid for it. However, a lot of Hawk lenses do rent for about $3,000 a day for an entire set, which is way more than that mirrorless camera. You may be wondering, why are they renting such expensive lenses while using such cheap cameras? Well, you can't have both expensive lenses and expensive cameras with a under 8 mil budget. So they pick and they chose lenses, which was the right choice because they just matter way more than the camera you're shooting on, even if that camera is only shooting in 8-bit. Their idea behind shooting with this camera is, instead of wasting time doing lens swaps and recalibrating all of the gear that they were using on that camera, to just swap cameras. Yes, they got a bunch of Sony a7S IIs and just put all the lenses they wanted to use for the day on each of those cameras. So all they had to do was swap the body in and out of the rig. Super easy, super simple, and it saved them tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment rental just by doing that. Of course, this came with some severe restrictions. You had to be very careful with your lighting. In fact, the DP said, if you're not too dirty and you keep to certain rules and exposure and color, you can shoot really beautiful, monumental images with it. And he's absolutely right. You can do that with any camera. Any camera out there with a decent bit rate can shoot absolutely beautiful images. If you put the right lens on, you light the right way, and you follow all the rules you need to, it'll look amazing. So that does beg the question, why don't more DPs do this? Why aren't more people shooting on mirrorless cameras? The real reason people aren't doing this more comes down to budget almost entirely in 2 very different ways. Really, let's talk about that lower end first, because honestly, it matters a whole lot. When you are shooting a film with $100,000 to $300,000, honestly, anything under 5 million, sometimes you just don't have the options that bigger films do. When you're shooting a film that is truly micro budget, and I mean like around $100,000, a mirrorless camera sounds like a great idea, until you really look at the pro-con analysis of it all. Honestly, shooting on like an older Cine Alta cam, like if you're like Sony f55 or something, or your Canon like C300, those cameras become a whole lot more appealing to that kind of market. And it's not because of what it can do, it's more that you get a good camera, you get maybe a couple good lenses, or you shoot everything on a 24 to 70, and you're shooting with a crew of maybe 5 people. When you're doing that, honestly, you're not really looking out for and comparing cameras. It's not that big of a deal. Naturally, on the other side, when you have a lot of money, you might as well get the best that money has to offer. Now, the Creator was a great experiment into seeing how you can move the camera and go fast. The problem was it really just didn't work. Honestly, when you map out your shots and you think about things very, very intentionally, things work a whole lot better. When you're not just whipping the camera around left and right, things surprisingly match, cut together well. It looks great in the edit. The colorist has an easier job. Honestly, everybody on set has an easier job doing everything. The lighting can be so much more intentional. Your lens choice can be more intentional. Your camera movement's more intentional. So obviously, most DPs who aren't looking to just, throw around a camera randomly are going to pick more cinema-based cameras. There's not a reason to choose a small body that doesn't help them. For example, with my Lumix S5, known for having great IBIS, I can hold a camera very, very steady at 200 millimeters. It looks fine. It looks like there's IBIS on, but it looks fine. At the same time, I can hold my Red Dragon, not super rigged out, just the Red Dragon body, maybe a microphone on, some batteries, and matte box at 200 millimeters, and hold it at the same level of steadiness. I throw on a little bit of stabilization in post, and it looks better than any camera on the market with IBIS. It's heavier. It's meant to work better. The handheld looks better. It's universal. You can throw it on. You can throw it on dollies. You can throw it on any kind of tripod you want. Love those O'Connors. You can throw it on drones and cranes and jibs and steady cams and like the RE Trinity. You can put it on all that stuff very easily because there's stuff meant for it. There's an industry standard, and that matters a whole lot. I know that last part was kind of ranty, so let me get things a little more concise and wrap it up real quick. Every DP just wants to focus on one thing. I know on YouTube we can get very, very concerned and just obsessive, honestly, about gear. And at the end of the day, gear is a tool. It just doesn't matter. Once something's good enough, it just is good enough. Yes, there are pros and cons and money-saving options, but no DP really wants to care about gear. It's why when digital came on the scene, most people didn't care. It's honestly why RE as a brand just wins. RE's idea as a company, and I promise this is going somewhere, is about making the digital cinema camera process as close to film as possible. They made all the buttons in the same spot. They made all of the information the same. They tried to change almost nothing, and it worked. And it's why they're at the top of the game. It was a very smart marketing move because they knew DPs just want to make art. And that is the heart of this whole video, is DPs just want to make pretty pictures. They just want to tell a story. And if I, as a DP, am concerned about my camera, oh no, are the highlights gonna blow out because the dynamic range sucks? Is this gonna be sharp enough because the lens isn't good? Is this gonna end up looking good to the producers because, the color matching of the clothes aren't good because I have a crew of 5 people and I have to be wardrobe and makeup and the director and the DP? No, nobody wants to deal with that. People just wanna sit down, grab their camera, grab their lens, put on some lights, grab a nice, beautiful frame, and shoot it. They want to tell a story. That's all DPs want to do. Technology obsession, unfortunately, has ruined this idea. Everybody these days on YouTube is talking about, oh, does it have RAW? What codecs does it have? What resolution can it shoot at? At the end of the day, those are great. They're all good things. I talk about them on my channel. But what really matters is the art. If you don't know how to light a shot, if you don't know what focal length to choose, if you don't know how to frame things up, you will not make good pictures. You ultimately are not a good DP, no matter what camera, no matter what lens you have. And I think that's being lost on this generation of YouTube filmmakers, because there's a lot of great information coming out, but a lot of it is very gear obsessive, because that's what does well on YouTube. And I've noticed that my gear videos do very, very well on YouTube, so I will keep making them, obviously, if people enjoy them. But at the heart of it, making content isn't really something that I can teach. I can't teach somebody to have a good eye for lighting. I can't teach somebody to have a good eye for framing. That's something you just have to go out and practice yourself, because that's all DPs really want to do. And if that's not something you're passionate about, then maybe you shouldn't pursue a career as a DP, and maybe you should just focus on videography. Honestly, it's more about capturing the moment. It's a little more documentary, I guess. It really, the end of this video, my kind of final words about this is the reason people don't use mirrorless cameras for movies is it doesn't help them make art easier. Cinema cameras have a better workflow. They're easier to manage. They have a crew who knows how to work around them and makes making pretty pictures easier. And that's why they probably will never be widely accepted in Hollywood. There are just better cameras out there that are easier to work with. Till next time.